I wanted to go over the steps for explicating a passage because there's lots of different ways that you can do it, but I like to use this way because it's very structured and simplified. So you have 4 steps and you get 5 points for each step, so each one is equally important, although some might be easier for you to actually write about. Step 1 is context, so where in the story did it occur? So give some events before and after to show that you've read around the passage. Step 2 is to explain the actual words. This is where you might have to look up some vocabulary words, looking for figurative language, so if there's any analogies or metaphors or similes, that sort of thing, or a hyperbole, that's where you would put it, is in step 2. Also in step 2, or step 1 and 2, somewhere in there you need to state if it's dialogue, who are they talking to, or if they use a pronoun like he, she, you, what is that referring to? So assume that the person reading your explication is not familiar with the story, so you would have to explain it to them. That's essentially what you're doing, is explaining in great detail the passage. Step 3 is where you go beyond what's actually happening in the story on a literal sense, and you go to some of the things that Foster talked about. You don't have to cover everything to give the big picture, just pick 1 or 2 things, like maybe a theme, or that it's a turning point in the story, or something that relates to Foster text. Then step 4 is essential because you have to support. If you say that this is showing that he's blind, then maybe you would have another example from the story that made you think this. Or if you predict that something's going to happen, then in step 4 you need to back it up with support, and so that's where you would put another passage. So I have here just an example. This is not one that you are going to be writing about, but let's say that I have letter 2 here, and this is the passage. Now you would put a lot more thought into this. I'm just sort of winging it here to show you how you would do it. And if it was me, I would take my notes using the format that I have. I like to use acronyms, so CEDS. So why is it not letting me type? There. So for C, you would put, so I'm just putting the C there for how you would take your notes. So you want to provide context. So this is in letter 2 when he's writing to his sister. So you would have Walton writing to his sister. This is however many months later. It's 3 months later after his first letter, and however many days before, I don't remember, I'd have to look it up, but that's what you would take in your notes. I think letter 4 is how far later? It's only a month later, and a month before his next letter. Who the passage is about, if applicable, if dialogue, if who is speaking. So the passage is Walton talking to his sister and describing what he is experiencing on his voyage or journey. All right, so that might be enough for notes anyhow. E would be, this is where you look at the words in the page, in the passage. So romantic would be a word that I would pull out, right? So I write down romantic's a word I want to touch on. Bitterly, other words, gentle yet courageous. I have no one near me, gentle yet courageous. So he wants a person near him. So I'm just taking notes for this passage in case if I get that one. Cultivated sounds like farming. Possessed of a cultivated as well as a capacious. So I'd have to look that word up, right? May not know what it means, so you'd have to look that up. Whose tastes are like my own, to approve or amend. Approve or amend my plans. I also might want to point out, so another thing I might put in my notes, approve or amend has some nice alliteration to it. Anything else? Cultivated and capacious, so that's also some good alliteration in there. So these are the kind of things that you would point out. You would also probably want to reword it. So if I always say, if you're describing it to a fourth grader, they of course would not know any of these words. So you would have to really dumb it down. So in step 2 is where you literally are looking at the words on the page and what they mean. Okay. So then D is where you would touch on what are some of the themes. So a theme that I see in this one is definitely friendship. And he's talking about what kind of a person he wants, is someone whose tastes are like my own. So he's kind of touching on his pursuits, and we get to know him a little bit more, and you can explain that in step 3 as well as how it parallels, this Walton character parallels later Victor's pursuits. So those are the things. That's probably enough for step 3 that I'd want to touch on in that step. Okay, and then for S, where else can I see this theme of friendship? And oh my, you can find all kinds of areas where later on Henry and Victor are friends. So my support might come from later on, because you know you're supposed to have read through chapter 6 by the time you're writing this. So you will have experienced the monster coming to life, and you will have lots of opportunities to find friendship with. So I would probably use a passage, find a passage, and I'd just have it in my notes, and I'd have a passage where Henry and him are, Henry saves him basically. I don't want to give too much away in case you haven't read that far, but Henry comes to bring him back to health. So I'd find a Henry showing friendship example, I think would back that up nicely. So that would be my notes just for that one. So I've got just some really quick notes. Then if I come in that day to class and land on that one, I've got my notes and I'm ready to write on that one. I just look at my notes and I begin writing. And you don't have to set it up like an essay with an intro or anything. You literally would just start with something like, this passage comes from letter 2 in which R. Walton is writing to his sister, and give her name, blah, 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 and sharing, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to write it all out here because this would be a real long video if I do that. Then I would touch on some of the things in my notes, like what happened before and after it, to show Mrs. Cody that I have read letter 1 and I've read letter 3. So you always want to touch on some things in the chapters preceding and after this. Okay, so that would answer step 1. Step 2, then I'm going to talk about, in this passage, Shelley brings up the idea of romanticism. And what does that mean? You know, it's not like love letters and flowers and chocolates, right? So then I would talk about romanticism just briefly. She uses words like courageous and cultivated and capacious to show Walton's need for a certain type of friend. And then I might reword it to say, what do all those words mean? By cultivated, she means this. By capacious, she means that. And then I might talk a little bit about alliteration, since that was in my notes, is also a key component of this passage. And give some examples, okay? Then step 3, I'm going to say this passage touches on the theme of friendship, which is one of many themes in this novel. Walton longs for a friend in these opening letters, which sets the stage for when Victor enters the story and Walton instantly befriends him despite his bizarre and whatever you want to say about his countenance, because he's definitely in a horrible state at that point, but yet Walton looks at him and is like, ooh, finally a friend, right? So I would maybe talk a little bit about how he's so desperate for a friend at this point. And then I might also touch on how the frame story is set up in this. So you might have had that in your notes too, since this is part of the frame story, I might touch on that. So in step 3, I would offer a little bit more about how they are parallels of one another. Walton and Victor are both ambitious individuals, and this provides the reader with dual plots as both men pursue their ambitions. All right, and then I might talk about how the frame story is set up in these opening. The frame story, blah, 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 is set up in these opening. Right. Then I have to do step 4. Don't neglect this. You have to put a passage showing, right? So if I said that friendship is a key theme and I say that they're parallels of one another, then I'm going to have to pick some support that supports one of the depth items. So I would say that this friendship theme is later shown when Henry shows up to take care of Victor, blah, blah, and then I put a quote, blah, 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 Shelley, page number, period, and then I would explain how this supports step 3. All right, so that's really, really briefly how you would approach a passage explication. I hope this helps. If it was me, I would take notes. I've got the passages here that I'm choosing, and I would literally just take notes, CEDS for each one, CEDS, CEDS. Doesn't have to be in depth. Some people like to write out every single one. You don't know which one you're going to get, so you may not want to do that much work. You just want to have kind of some ideas for each one so that we roll that day and you're ready to go no matter what comes up, that you can do your best work. The main thing is, most of you, if you're reading, you can probably do step 1 and 2 fairly easily. But it's step 3 and 4 that are going to be based on each of you and what you've taken from the story. So note, every student should have a different response, especially for step 3 and 4. Right? So don't share your notes with other people. If you put all this work into it and you take really thorough notes, please, please, please do not share that with other people, because then what it does is it lowers everybody's to look equally as good as yours, and you want your writing and your ideas to be reflective of your hard efforts. So if you have any questions, let me know. I hope this video helped. As I said, this was just me winging it to give you an idea of how to approach the structure of a passage explication. And you are able to use your notes, so 1 page of notes and your book. Your notes will be turned in to me and then shredded at the end of the semester. You can use them for your essay if you want them back, but then I hold on to them so that you don't pass them on to other students.